I've met so many people who love to wear high heels, even if they have a guide dog in one hand or a white cane in the other, or those who still love fashion, even though they can't necessarily see some of these patterns, or there are certain contrasts that just don't work. So it's really interesting to kind of delve into that world and know that there's this community that's been completely overlooked and underserved, and trying to find ways together that we can improve those experiences.
Welcome back to the See-Through Podcast, a podcast that creates transparency on life with a disability through raw conversations with the disability community. I'm your host, Lance Johnson, and I live and podcast with the eye disease retinitis pigmentosa, or RP for short. In this episode, I talk with Aille Jovanovic, the founder of the clothing brand Aille Design. Alexa and I discuss how her brand designs inclusive clothing using Braille. We talk about the clothing she makes and the process behind her products, and how Aille Design has carved a special place for her within the disability community. But before our talk begins, make sure you subscribe to the podcast, follow on social media. The handle is @SeeThroughPod. And if you want bonus episodes and exclusive content, you have to join the See-Through Few over on Patreon. The link is in the show description. Here's my talk with Alexa. Aille Jovanovic, welcome to the See-Through Podcast.
Lance, thank you so much. This is awesome.
I got your name right.
You did. I gotta say, you're one of the only ones. Typically, I get Jovanovic, so I mean, you were spot on.
Yeah, like I was trying to think about how to spell out your name, and I was thinking of there's a tennis player, Djokovic,
Yep.
And I was like, that's probably how it ends. But
yeah, no, high school, I used to always get asked if I play tennis, and I probably am the worst tennis player you'll ever meet. So, no, but definitely the way you pronounce the name for sure.
Awesome. Yeah. I played a little tennis in high school.
Okay. Speaking
of names that are hard to pronounce, or at least for me, because it doesn't take much for me to stumble on a name, but the name of your clothing brand. When I originally saw it, I was like Aille Design, but it's pronounced Aille Design, and that makes tremendous sense. So how about we start with that? Like, let's hear about you, who you are, and then maybe your clothing brand. Let's hear a little bit about that.
Yeah, I'm going to comment on the pronunciation just off the top there. So you are spot on. It's Aille Design, but I've got an Aille Design, Aille Design. Sometimes people think my name's Aille, but I'm Alexa, and the company's called Aille Design because it actually comes from this French verb called or named aller, and it means to go forward or to move forward. And so essentially everything that we're doing is the direction that fashion needs to move forward into. Inclusivity has to be a part of the way every step there, and diversity includes disability. And it sort of just kind of brings it all together. So even when you're visually looking at our logo, there are two dots over the letter I, and it's the Braille character for the letter I. So we've got that disability incorporation right from the start. And then if you think about it, that character alone is the way that you actually pronounce the name. So that's a little intel there. But yeah, so I'm Aille Jovanovic. I'm a Braille fashion designer, and I'm also the founder of Aille Design. It originated as a research project when I was in university. I studied fashion, and I didn't know that I was going to become a Braille fashion designer, but I couldn't imagine being on a different path. This has been absolutely incredible and so fulfilling. But really, it all started just having this huge passion for design. And once I went to university, I kind of learned about fashion in a different sense and all of the components that were lacking in it. So how there is really no accessibility or diversity or inclusivity within fashion. So I kind of changed my mindset there, knowing that whatever I was to do at the end of my career, university career, I wanted it to involve creating a greater social impact through fashion. And that led to Braille beadwork and working directly with the visually impaired community. So that's a little bit of how it started.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I agree. It definitely should be a part of every industry, right? Disability inclusion But this may be corny, but also when you say Aille Design, it's like Aille Design. Alexa Design.
With like the fact that our company is so community based too, in that sense, it's kind of like Aille Design, like you are a part of this process. Everything we do is through the co-design process. So there's really that kind of piece of independence and empowerment that comes through all of our designs, knowing that you can read all of the Braille fully independently if you are a Braille reader. So that's kind of cool. I'm going to have to add that to my name pitch, Aille Design, because of the co-design process.
Yeah, exactly. And speaking of that, like that personalization process, you can, if you're interested in purchasing, some clothing from Aille Design, you have the option that you can customize a t-shirt and a mask. But before we talk about that, how about you just talk about the products you sell?
Yeah, of course. So down the line, we'll sell quite a few more pieces with a lot more range, a lot more fashion appeal. But at this very moment, we currently sell t-shirts, and we've got a few more masks left. T-shirts were the very first pieces that we started with because ultimately, if you think about it, it's the most inclusive piece out there. Every single person owns a t-shirt, whether it's for something to dress up, dress down, no matter what religion or economic status you're in or culture, the t-shirt is just such a versatile piece. So we felt that that was the best place to start with this enhanced version of inclusion. So we've got white t-shirts and black t-shirts. Some of them feature Braille that's black, and others feature Braille that's silver. And we worked with the community closely to kind of determine what the phrases in Braille should read. So we've got a white t-shirt that says, "My plain white tee," in silver Braille. So it's kind of cheeky, it's more functional that this is identifying it's your white shirt, but in a fun, playful way.
Yeah.
We've got a black t-shirt with silver Braille that reads, "Fashion is for everyone." And so ultimately that's one of the kind of pillars that we stand on. It's just so strong to our values. And more recently, another piece that's maybe even stronger to our values is the phrase, "Diversity includes disability." And so we have that as a white shirt with black Braille beadwork, which is actually what I'm wearing right now. It's my personal favorite. And I think it just holds so true. So much of society is keen to be diverse and inclusive now, but often the disability community becomes completely overlooked in those conversations. I mean, when it comes to fashion, so many times the conversation is about size inclusivity, which is great, and more recently, race and gender equality and age, but disability still remains excluded in that conversation. But yeah, that was the reasoning behind this particular t-shirt. And then we've got a series of masks. They come in burgundy, red, indigo blue, and black. And the phrases on those ones are, "I love your mask around the bridge of your nose." It's also the name of the company that we partnered with when we created the masks. And the second phrase is, "Chin up, mask on." So kind of a sense of keep your head up, like we're in this together, we're going to get through it. Yeah. And then with all of our pieces, because there's just such a story to tell, we also provide a full customization option. So if you have a specific phrase that you love or something that means quite a bit to you, you can have that brailled as well. It's really great for like friends of friends, or even we've had some companies that have their name brailled out to kind of show that them as a company or a full group are inclusive in nature.
Yeah, I've had a couple of friends. John Marin, he's a friend of mine.
Yes.
He had some mask made. Or is it mask or shirts?
So he got shirts for the entire group. Yeah, the entire group. I think the 6 is what he calls them, for the 6 that are in the book for CS. And then he himself got a mask that says author.
Yeah.
I didn't know you guys were friends. That's awesome. It's such a close community.
I've had him on this podcast. He's also here in New York City, and we've met a few times. And he's a great guy. And then I also, my friend John Grimes from the Ambiguously Blind podcast, he has a custom shirt from you as well. I guess I'm missing out. I'm behind.
I mean, maybe by the end of this, we'll have the See-Through podcast in Braille.
Oh, that'll definitely happen. I promise you. Also, I noticed if I'm just dropping names right now. Mary Mamalidi, you have her featured on your website.
I adore Mary. She's fantastic. Yeah. She's also Canadian, and she's just a hoot. We had a conversation recently, and I think that's the hardest I've laughed this year to date. So she's fantastic. I'm a huge fan of hers.
Yeah, I've had her on this podcast, and I've been on our Kitchen Confession podcast.
Yes.
So yeah, she's great. And everybody I've talked to from Canada is fun to talk to and very nice and friendly.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what we're known for.
Yeah, that is like the stereotype, isn't it? Yeah. But going back again to your products, I think it's really neat what you're doing and how you're making fashion like inclusive. But I have to ask, like, why? You know, like what, like where did the idea come from? Like, do you have a disability yourself? Do you know someone with a disability? Like, what inspired you to go this direction? Out of all the directions you could have went in the fashion world, what made you pick this path?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So I myself don't identify as having a disability. And so for that reason, it's so important to me that we're constantly working with individuals from the community to make sure that there is a disability presence in everything that we do. I want it to be known that I'm never trying to assume the needs of anyone or appropriating anything. So it very much is a community-built product. And when I was in my final year of school, I had to do my research capstone, and I knew I wanted to do something that was involving a community that's largely overlooked when it comes to fashion. And so I sort of just started thinking more about disability communities, like we were saying, just constantly overlooked in this particular area. And I was window shopping, something I love to do, and I came across this beaded jacket, believe it or not. And something happened. Also, I love beads. Full disclosure, anything beaded or sparkly, I kind of just run to, whether or not I'm wearing it. I just so driven. I love the tactile nature. But I took a look at this and I kind of just had this aha moment. And I imagined all those beads sort of rearranging to be different phrases in Braille. The bead size was just so similar to Braille. I questioned, why couldn't this piece be beautiful but also functional? Imagine that all of this beadwork was fully legible and could describe the outfit, or it could completely empower someone and allow them to choose garments from their closet. And so I just started getting all these ideas, went home, did a ton of research. Nothing even remotely closely existed at the time. And while I was doing all that research, there was almost nothing that came up about the disability community in the context of being fashion consumers. So I was like, okay, right then and there, I was like, this is a huge problem. How is there no research that exists on this? So I made a quick prototype of what I imagined Braille fashion could be and started reaching out to different individuals locally who identified as visually impaired or who could read Braille. And I showed them the prototype. We kind of discussed the legibility, placement, etc. But then furthermore, we started talking about different challenges that they'd experienced in fashion in the past. So everything from how to actually organize your closet to how do you choose what to wear? Are fashion trends important to you? How does that process work? All the way to the misconceptions of what it means to look and feel blind, because there are the huge stereotypes of what disability means and what blindness or visual impairment means. Meanwhile, during these co-design processes, I've met so many people who love to wear high heels, even if they have a guide dog in one hand or a white cane in the other, or those who still love fashion, even though they can't necessarily see some of these patterns, or there are certain contrasts that just don't work. So it's really interesting to kind of delve into that world and know that there's this community that's been completely overlooked and underserved, and trying to find ways together that we can improve those experiences.
Yeah, I love that.
It was just born. It wasn't something that I had planned to have happen. It was kind of this aha moment, and now it's become my strongest passion in life. So it was really interesting the way that it all came together.
Yeah, some of the best ideas just happen like that, you know? So you got to ride the waves when they come, you know? You have a good idea. A good idea is a good idea.
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to business, you know? And, like, you see, like, and I hate to think of things like that because sometimes it feels, like, kind of gross when you're like, there's a place in the market for the idea I have, you know, and then you try to execute it. But, I mean, it's just what comes with. I mean, I'm even like that with this podcast. You know what I mean? I kind of noticed the same thing. I was like, oh, there's not many podcasts out there that are around, you know, the disability community. And if they do exist, they're like very specific to a specific disability. Like, you know, there might be a podcast just on, for what example, the eye disease I have. I have retinitis pigmentosa, or there might be a podcast specifically on, like, let's say, you know, some sort of muscular dystrophy or something like that. So I was like, oh, maybe I'll have a podcast covering everything, you know? So I don't know where I was going with that, but I do love
No,
what
I
you're
mean,
doing.
thank you. How you were kind of saying like ideas evolving into businesses, or like maybe having like that inauthenticity, knowing that it could kind of be marketed afterwards. But that's one thing that I think I enjoyed so much about this process. It was
Yeah.
never the intention to form a business. It was kind of just something that happened naturally while we were going through all these discussions. Everyone that I was working with was kind of just like, so now how can I get one of these things? How can I implement this into my wardrobe? And I was like, oh, well, like it doesn't exist. It's a research project. Like maybe I'll do my master's and like I can keep evolving this idea. And they're like, wait, what? Like we've got something here. And it was just so cool to see how proud and enthusiastic different participants were, even having just been exposed to the concept for maybe 1 or 2 sessions. And so it's kind of that driving force that led us to actually becoming a business. I joined an incubator, was kind of just like, hi, I have this research and all this like amazing support. Now what do I do? And then we're here a year and a half later. So it's really cool to kind of see how that did evolve. And it was evolving purely out of need. It was never something that was like, hey, I can make a bunch of money off of this, but rather this actually has a lot of great potential and can just help the world socially.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. Yeah. And you're doing a great job. So keep it up. And
thank you.
On that
a
note,
long way to go though.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I feel the same way. I was going to ask you, like, so you had this idea, this great idea, to put Braille on clothing and kind of have this more inclusive brand. As someone who's a creative myself, and I'm always intrigued by the process of getting something started. Let's talk about your step one. You have the idea. All right. What's next? Like how long, what was the process like to get your first product,
Okay. So we won't even talk about like products for sale yet. We'll just be like prototypes. So
yeah, prototype.
I don't know if you can tell, but I'm kind of blushing now because my process was so faulty in comparison to where it is now. I'm telling you, the very first prototype I made, it was a white collared shirt, had black Braille beadwork on the collar and a little bit on the face of the shirt. So I could test out the thicker textile of the collar and then the more thinner fabric of just like the basic shirt. And I was hand beading all of the beads by hand. I also used my slate and stylus. So I would put it onto the fabric, kind of mark out where my dots needed to be, make sure my spacing was kind of accurate. I found different sizes of beads so we could test what would be most legible and what would work spacing wise. And I was just hand sewing with a needle and thread every single bead. So to make one word, it probably took me about an hour, if not more. So I was just like sitting in my dorm room, like binge watching Friends in the background, like sewing all of these beads, just like sweating everywhere. And now the process is significantly better. But it was kind of just like, okay, I have this idea. Let's try to make it work. So I picked up the things that I knew of, and it's really cool because we went through this iterative process. So seeing prototype to prototype to prototype growing. With the white collar shirt, we just this past year made a new revised version of it with our new techniques. And it's really cool just to see that evolution. With that particular piece, actually, my husband surprised me and wore it to our wedding. We did one of those first looks, and I just immediately bawled my eyes out. He was just wearing my white collared shirt prototype under his suit, which was super cute. But yeah, that shirt alone has had such a life of its own.
Yeah, that's an amazing story. Yeah, so you make your prototype in your dorm room. You're hand sewing, all this. You're putting Braille on, like that's probably.
I was going to say, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Oh, I want to hear it.
I was going to say taking that shirt and then just being like this kind of broke college student running off to the TTC. So like Toronto's subways, essentially, just like going from each one, reaching out to different people, hoping that they want to meet me and like read the Braille in the shirt and like open up about these potentially vulnerable experiences leading to fashion. And everything is so personal and intimate. So it was just really cool. And I'm so thankful that there was enough people that had faith in the idea and were agreeing to meet with me, because otherwise, had those first few people not said anything, this wouldn't have happened. I remember once some of the participants, once they got more comfortable with the process, they would open up to me and be like, So my friends and I, we all got your email saying that you were looking for participants, and I was the chosen one to go meet with you to see how this would go. And she was like, no, everyone else wants to be a part of it. Like, they want to feel the Braille on this. I remember that same woman, after only meeting her once, our second meeting was supposed to be in this bar. She had just finished a yoga class upstairs, and I was meeting her in this bar downstairs. And all of a sudden, this group of like 6, 7 people walked towards me, and I'm like, okay, what is going on? And she was so excited about what we were working on that she invited a bunch of her sighted friends to our meeting, essentially took over the meeting and was interviewing them, asking if this is something they would support, even though it had Braille on it. Would they still wear it? What were their thoughts about disability and fashion and those kind of disconnects? So it was just so cool to witness these kind of like ambassador-like moments and the confidence that was in the idea at such an early stage. And just motivated all the prototypes to come faster and faster, and then to kind of test out the different techniques of sizes for Braille, or are we doing black beads on a black dress, so that way it's a little bit more intimate and the Braille isn't as focal, so that's going to be a little bit more personal. Maybe that particular person could benefit from having Braille on their clothing to identify certain pieces, but didn't want to be as vocal about having it and didn't want it to be that conversation starter. Okay. Whereas when you have the high contrast, like the black beads on the white shirt that I'm wearing, there's a higher chance that someone's going to approach you and say, is that Braille? Or what does that say? Or I love Braille. Like, where did you find this? And just kind of open up a conversation about disability. So it's really interesting the different ways that you can prototype. And that's kind of the evolution of it.
I love that you have two different kind of types, like one more utilitarian approach where it's just Braille that literally all it does is just identify the piece you're wearing, and it's more blending into the piece. And then also, if you want to be bold and you want to kind of show off your Braille and have a specific message, you know, you can do that too. I think having both options are both are winners. So, you know, I was going to ask you about Braille because I don't have a clue how to read it, you know, like just being honest. And so I'm assuming you didn't know how to read it when you had the idea.
No, I didn't know how to read Braille. I do now visually. I don't know how to read Braille through touch, but I've always just been really fascinated by it. The fact that there are people who can read solely by touch, and then just as a designer, the kind of makeup of Braille, I think is so cool. I'm very into high contrast, into kind of geometric shapes. So having a variety of dots in this form that then also have this empowerment is just something I've always thought was really cool. And then loving beads, it kind of came together naturally. Yeah. But yeah.
Yeah, I bet
do you have any interest in learning Braille one day, do you think?
I definitely want to learn it. I think it'd be good to know, you know, and would help me connect with, you know, a lot of other people I know who do use Braille, you know. So for that reason, I'd like to learn it. But I was going to ask you, like, and maybe you don't want to admit this publicly, but how many times did you have a typo?
Oh my goodness. So in those early days, like I was saying, I was using the Braille slate and stylus. And so for anyone who doesn't know what a Braille slate and stylus is, essentially it's something that you use and you punch in all of the different Braille. But one of the biggest kind of painstaking points of it is that you have to input all of the Braille backwards. That way, when you flip your piece of paper around, it's been raised correctly. So just in those beginning stages of learning Braille and then having to put everything backwards, I'd be like, okay, this is either this letter or this letter because of the way that they kind of reverse each other. So that kind of got very confusing. So for me, I'll kind of type everything out ahead of time, and then visually I'll just be kind of following that same pattern. But doing things by memory and then also using a slate and stylus becomes very tricky. That's when you open it up for room for error.
Yeah.
Even just the way describing it is already confusing.
Yeah, I bet you on that note, whenever you had people in person, you know, feeling the Braille on the products of your shirt, whenever it, you know, they felt it and they could read it, that was probably a great feeling on multiple levels. Can you talk about like that first experience of having people enjoy your product?
Yeah, absolutely. So in my background here, actually, I have a denim jacket, and there are these 7 silver stripes. They have black beadwork on top of it, which is all of the Braille. And each stripe is a different category of information. it completely describes what the garment is. So first one is an overview of the garment, then it describes the color, all of the adornment, how it's supposed to fit, how it's laundered, etc. And this piece behind me is actually the very first one that someone was able to read successfully. And so this denim jacket has a very soft spot in my heart. I think I cried instantly as soon as I could hear the woman say the words out loud of what it said and saying it successfully and with just such ease and so quickly. It was kind of just like all of this work that we had been doing together, it's here. Like the concept works, now it's just a matter of implementing it, and now is there actually value to this? But we can do this. We can create Braille. It can be machine washable. It can be read without falling off, etc. So that was a really important milestone for us, and it's probably like top 5 moments of my life is seeing someone or hearing someone successfully read the Braille on that shirt or on that jacket.
Yeah, that sounds like a magical moment, and I'm sure that put a fire underneath you to keep going and push this thing even further. So how long has Aille Design been a clothing company?
So I joined the incubator in I joined the incubator in September of 2019. And that's when I was ready to become a business, though I didn't know what exactly that meant.
Yeah.
And then in January 2020 is when I officially announced the name of the company and that we were going to be a company, started kind of introducing the concept and the mission of the brand to others. But it really wasn't until summer 2020, I believe it was the month of June, that we started selling our first products. So we had those beginning stages where all we were doing was trying to build awareness and kind of build momentum as to why what we were doing was important. We were really fortunate that right off the bat, we had a television appearance on national TV in Canada on a program called Breakfast Television. And I remember being on the phone with a producer and she was like, okay, so maybe we'll do a close-up of like you sewing the beads. And I was like, that would be great. But like, what if instead we had this diverse fashion show and we had 3 or 4 models, all head to toe outfits incorporating Braille and really talking about the influence that it could have. I don't want this to be about me sewing clothes, but rather the actual community and how it can impact the community and bringing to light and challenging those stereotypes. And she was like, yes, absolutely. Hung up the phone. I was like, oh my God, Alexa, like you have one prototype. Like you're not a legit business yet. Like, what are you doing? So made all of those pieces like in that 1 month frame. And that kind of just built momentum. People were curious about these pieces. There was something that had never existed before, even for my research pieces, like everything we were having was already so different. That denim jacket made its appearance. And yeah, that's kind of what kickstarted it. But then June, we had an opportunity to be a part of a Canadian designer event. And I got offered a spot, and I didn't sell product yet, but there was no way I was going to pass up that opportunity. So really quickly, we learned how to actually materialize what we were doing and create T-shirts. And then November, we started making the masks because we had a really great friend and partner who had a business who was creating masks and asked if we wanted to do a collaboration and add an inclusive spin. So it's all really happened just organically, but it seems like it's happened in the best of ways. So we're excited. Now we're going to have a pretty big milestone in the coming month, and we're going to finally release another product. So really excited to see kind of what growth and momentum that might build and how we can kind of build out the rest of the company from there.
No, that's a cool story, and it seems like you have a great foundation built, and I'm very excited to see where you go from here. I can say I was in on the ground floor.
Absolutely, and I mean, as we start to expand, maybe New York City will be more in our future, and who knows, you can maybe even model or be an ambassador for the brand. We'll see what happens.
I'd love to. Yeah, I'd love to.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
Let's do it. You heard it here first. We'll you do that.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd love to. And I'm into fashion, like that classic phrase. I think there's a lot of truth in it. Look good, feel good.
Oh yeah.
And that's kind of the beauty of your brand is you have stylish product that has an emphasis on being inclusive to people with disabilities, and everyone needs to be fly. Everyone needs to feel fly. So it's like don't leave anyone out. So, and that's kind of part of your messaging, like diversity includes disability, and that I see that a lot on your marketing.
Yeah.
And kind of fighting, the social stigmas around what it means to look or feel blind or disabled. And I was going to ask you, like, from starting this, and kind of, you're almost like me in a sense. Like, when I started this podcast, I didn't know anyone in the disability community. It was me and my mom. My mom has RP, so that was it. And then I started reaching out and meeting people, and now I've interviewed a lot of people. I follow a lot of different people on social media, and I've learned a lot about the community and the people in it. And it's kind of, I guess my point is, like, since you kind of jumped in probably at ground zero too, like, how has it been getting ingrained and involved in this community? Has the community been welcome? Talk about that a little bit.
Absolutely. It's been a phenomenal experience. I definitely had some insecurities at the beginning, joining the community, knowing that I myself don't identify as having a disability. I didn't really know if that would create any backlash. But it's been an incredible experience joining. Everyone has been so welcoming. And I think that's one thing to be said for the disability community, and anyone kind of in this inclusive space fighting against social stigmas of any sort, anyone who really just wants to create greater impact in the world, is that a lot of people, or at least those that I've had the pleasure of meeting, have been very keen to help one another. And we're all kind of in this together, because as we grow this together, the world will be a better place, or we'll be able to create more significant change. So I've been really thankful to everybody that I've met. A connection that we built really early on, which has been a huge reason for all of the success that we've been able to have as a business, is a person that we met through the American Foundation for the Blind. Her name's Melody Goodspeed. If you don't know her, I will absolutely introduce you, because she is phenomenal. And so I met her March 2020. We were actually in New York City doing a photo shoot, and I met her, and she works for the American Foundation for the Blind, and she just started to introduce me to so many different people and all of their different networks. And the American Foundation for the Blind alone is doing such incredible work. So then to be affiliated with them and to learn more firsthand about the different initiatives that they've taken on has just been really incredible. And I think that's helped a lot, knowing that we have the support of AFB. It helps others to understand the credibility of what we're doing and the genuine nature of what we're doing. Like we were saying before, it's so easy that, there's a market and it's not being served, let me create a product, where that's not the case here. It very much is wanting to help others. That happens to be a byproduct of having a t-shirt or whatnot.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's been a really incredible experience. I've learned so much. Biggest takeaway is never assume the needs of anyone. I kind of knew that going into this process, but it's just ingrained that much further, because every single person's experience is so unique. Every lived experience is so unique. And it's just really incredible to have met so many different people, and it's had a huge impact on my life for sure.
This podcast has had such a positive impact on me, and that's kind of when I make episodes and I make content, I always try to think about how can I bridge the gap, like when I put something out, I don't want, just the disability community to listen. I want everyone to listen, because I think I'm trying to bridge that gap, and I think it feels so divided, and like I feel like the disability community can feel very secluded from, the non-disabled world. And I kind of have one foot in one world and one foot in another, because like I have a visual impairment. I grew up, but it didn't affect me growing up. It's just recently started to affect me, and I would say my trajectory going forward is, I'll be legally blind at some point in my life. My mom is legally blind, so it's like, it's weird. You talk about, you keep using the word identify, identify as someone with a visual impairment.
Yeah.
It's like, that's almost how I feel. I almost feel like I identify as someone with a visual impairment. And I do, like, I have a decreased, peripheral vision, and I have central blind spots in my vision at night. My eyes don't adapt well. But with that being said, I can still, maneuver around life, and I don't use a white cane, and I'm not like classified as legally blind. So it kind of creates this little bit of an identity crisis. And I talk about that a lot in here. Like, I got one foot in one world and one foot in the other. And I think that's what's neat about what you're doing. And you decided to dive into this community, and you found acceptance in it. I found acceptance in it. And then you're also simultaneously, while doing that, you're helping bridge that gap between those two worlds. I'd love to hear your thoughts about like how has your clothing brand educated people without visual impairments? How has your clothing brand educated people without disabilities? Like what change have you seen?
Yeah, absolutely. So I just want to start by saying that I completely agree with everything you've just said and how important it is to be able to bridge those gaps. You don't want to create something and then continue to have these different communities siloed. The biggest thing is bridging everything together and having one place where we can all coexist. And that's one of the biggest goals of the pieces that we're creating. So it has the Braille. It is fully legible. You can read it if you're a Braille reader, and it has that disability advocacy element. But the way that we've designed all of the pieces is that they're still going to be fashion forward. They're still going to be unique. They're still going to have that kind of aesthetic appeal. And the biggest reason for that is to make sure that it also remains appealing to the general sighted world or to the general fashion world, because it shouldn't be that this is a disability product over here, and then this is a fashion product, and then this is a fashion disability product. It needs to be able to all coexist. And so I myself, I don't have a visual impairment, but I can confidently wear this shirt and know that it's cool and love what it stands for. And then someone else may wear it who does have a visual impairment, think those same things, but if they happen to be able to read it, it's just that much more impactful. And so being able to make sure that these are pieces that can be worn by absolutely anyone was really important to us from the start. And that's one of the reasons why in our co-design process, we include fashion stylists and others who are interested in that fashion world to make sure that we never sacrifice that overall aesthetic. With the latter point, though, that you mentioned about what impact has this kind of brought, I think it's really just kind of opened up a lot of minds for people. So, for example, a lot of times, unless you yourself have been a part of a situation that may involve someone with a visual impairment or disability has affected you personally through a family member or a friend, a lot of times disability is just not something that comes to mind. You don't really realize how inaccessible a certain product or situation or experience might be. And that's something that we've heard a lot, is that it just generates a lot of conversation, whether or not you yourself are someone who's visually impaired or have a disability. Anytime you come across the Braille and you can comment on it, whether or not you do say something out loud, you kind of just have a bit of a shift in perspective, like, oh, that's Braille. I usually only see that in elevators. And then maybe that starts to shift. Oh, well, why do I only ever see that in elevators? Don't people need to get around in spaces that are not just elevators? Or kind of just makes you think a little bit about, oh, a different experience may not be very accessible. Like, for example, I remember being in a store that had an elevator, though when I got in it, I don't really think a wheelchair would fit in it. It was so tight and crammed. I was like, okay, well, what was this just for cosmetic reasons that we've placed this elevator in here, but someone who may have actually needed to use it can't? So it's just a way to kind of comment visually on all of the inaccessibilities in our society and kind of help to change those pieces. Because like we were saying, disability and accessibility needs to be able to exist in all industries. It doesn't stop at just fashion, but through what we're doing at Aille Design and being able to kind of start with the fashion products, we can then lend itself to the actual retail spaces or the virtual and digital spaces of stores. So is your website and shopping experience actually accessible? Are the stores designed in a way that can allow people with white canes or guide dogs or wheelchairs, et cetera, to be able to move freely? Or is their store so cluttered and you can't really find things or reach things? Does your staff understand how to properly and effectively work with individuals who may come into the store who have a disability, et cetera? So being able to figure out how to tweak all those types of experiences, this is sort of just that very first kind of entry into that conversation.
Yeah. Yeah, very well said. And
Thank you.
To your point, like once you see it, you can't unsee it, right? You know, once you learn about it, it's like, you know, it's for lack of a better word, it's eye opening. You know, like once I learned about like how inaccessible the world is, now everywhere I go, I'm like, that's inaccessible, that's inaccessible, that's inaccessible. Like I see a restaurant, I'm in New York, I'm walking around and there's like a flight of steps to a coffee shop and that's the only entrance. I'm like, well, that's like, you know, no one, it's not accessible. And it's honestly has changed the way who I support, honestly. And if I see a place that's very accessible, I'm like, okay. Yeah, you know, it's like I like vibe with it more, and I'm like, all right, this is cool. They actually put some thought into it, and you know, it's neat, and I think I'd like to see more of that, and that's kind of why I have conversations with people, and why I have a podcast, and you know, I'm still learning because, like I said, I still got one foot in one door and one foot in the other, and I'm just trying to make sense of it all. But the more and more I learn about it, and the more people I talk to, the more I can't unhear and unsee the things I'm learning about. So
absolutely. To that point about the different businesses and products, like maybe they were places that you never intended to support in the first place, but once you hear about this great initiative they're doing, you now go out of your way to support them because you're like, yeah, you know what? I really appreciate what you're doing. I have this newfound level of respect. For example, this past holiday season, there was a chocolate company in Canada named Purdy's. And I don't know if you came across it on Instagram, but they created a Braille, limited edition Braille box of assorted chocolates.
Wow.
And their biggest campaign here was being able to hand over a box of chocolates. You don't usually know what the chocolates are going to be, but visually you can kind of guess what it might be. As someone with a visual impairment, depending on your level of sight, you're actually picking chocolates and you have no idea what's going to happen. But so what they accompanied with their boxes were Braille explanations of every chocolate in there and their placement in the box. And I remember watching some of their videos, and so many people were actually brought to tears. Something as little as being able to choose a chocolate is something that you don't think of, but being able to do that completely independently, the power that brings. I think it was actually Molly Burke that had that specific experience in the video. But Purdy's, I wasn't necessarily buying Purdy's chocolate beforehand, but now if I need to buy chocolate, maybe that's the company I'm going to support because I so appreciate and respect what they're doing. And I remember reading that they sold out of their product, I think in like the first 2 days. So then they really quickly did another revamp and produced quite a few more boxes, and it's something that they might start introducing year after year. So hearing about different companies that make these little initiatives, it just really says so much to them, but also kind of says so much about what we as a society want. There was obviously a demand for this, and now finally those demands are being met.
Yeah, no, that's great. I'll have to look into that and maybe buy some chocolate. I like chocolate.
Yeah, they sent me a box, which was really cool. So I'll send you a photo of it after this. It's really awesome.
Yeah, love to see it. And you know what? People get, like you said, people being brought to tears over that. I think that's just proof of how, you know, I don't want to call anyone ungrateful. I don't know anyone besides myself, but I have the idea in my head that people can be ungrateful for how the world is built for them if they don't have a disability, and people are a little bit like ungrateful about how the world is built for them, you know, and you know, even something like I think about it like something as simple as like if you're left-handed and you play guitar, like you have less options of guitars. Like, and that's just one small thing. That's just being left-handed, you know? And it's like, imagine if you're a wheelchair user, imagine if you use a white cane and you're blind. Like, it's just like, you know, it's just like, imagine if you put yourself in their shoes, what you would learn in one day about what isn't accessible. You know, and I don't know. I think about that sometimes. It's good to have perspective.
Absolutely.
And it's also good to be self-aware too, to understand, like me and you, like we're like, I have a visual impairment, I have RP, but it's good to know that, like, you got to be self-aware about your personal situation too, and how you fit into the grand scheme of things, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I love all those stories you just shared. And I think that's proof of there's like a hunger for the products you're selling, and there's a hunger, like the chocolate example is, you know, if, you know, your clothing company is a perfect example, but then you throw in a chocolate, and then there's probably a million other, not a million, actually, that's actually, I take that back. There's not enough brands doing it. You know, that's what I wanted to say is there's a hunger for these types of products, and their success is proof of that.
Absolutely.
You know? And, I was going to ask you a question, and if you don't know the answer, it's fine. But
okay.
So I thought about this. This is more of a philosophical question.
Okay.
In a digital world, you know, in a world that's growing more and more digital,
mm-hmm.
what do you think the future of Braille is?
So I'm actually really happy that you brought that up, and I'm happy to answer it. So there has been a lot of debate about the relevancy of Braille given the huge rise in audio technologies, et cetera. But one of the biggest things that will always hold true is that Braille is literacy. Braille is equivalent to learning how to actually read. There's a lot of skills and just different types of grammar, spelling, et cetera, that you're not going to be able to obtain through purely listening to something. And also, what if you are deaf and blind? There's not going to necessarily be the capacity to have that audio element. But also, you don't always want something always talking to you. So it's really interesting because that was something that came up quite early on in my research stages. And it was something I brought up to a lot of participants that I was working with. And there are so many people that are such advocates of Braille. And I think one of the biggest problems that we're currently facing with Braille is just the lack of individuals that there are to then teach the language, or the lack of resources available in Braille. So then the actual desire to go through the process of learning the code isn't going to necessarily be as rewarding, because you know that then you need to make a lot of those materials yourself. But if we can kind of actively, as a community, build awareness about why Braille is so relevant still and the importance that it has, being able to better integrate these incorporations into other pieces, I think will really just help that.
Yeah, that's an awesome answer. Like, cause it taught me, cause I was genuinely asking because I had no clue, you know, like,
and it's a super valid question. But yeah, there are certain things that you just can't get from audio.
Yeah, I agree. And it's like you said, I think that makes sense. It's literacy. You know, if anyone out there listening likes to read books, you know, like Braille would be the way you would read if you were blind, you know? So it's like, you wouldn't want to not have that option, right? Like, you may hate audiobooks, you know, sometimes you want to sit in bed and read, you know?
Exactly. But like, even just like trying to incorporate audio tech into every single thing that you have, like, that's also going to become really costly. Some of those pieces are going to kind of bug out. They're not always going to work, or they might need to be updated. Whereas holes in paper, they're always going to be there. So there's definitely benefits to both, but I think that while they're both beneficial, they both need to stay around. I don't think one can really outweigh the other. Yeah,
I agree. And also, like, just thinking about it objectively, if you're out in public, you would probably prefer Braille over audio. So that way, you know, not saying that you want to shy away from being letting the world know you're visually impaired, but maybe you just don't want the attention of having your phone blurt out stuff all the time.
Exactly.
Or, you know what I mean? You know, so it's like
absolutely
a privacy thing too, I'd say. All right, I have one more question for you.
Okay.
And it's a good closer because you're someone you've went to college, you studied fashion, you started this clothing company. Mm-hmm. What advice would you give to someone listening who maybe has a similar aspiration? You know, would you advise them to you know, what because fashion industry interests me because it can be very, very, very shallow, and we all know that. Like shallow, it can be the absolute most shallow thing on the entire planet. You know.
Tell me how you really feel.
If we're being honest, like, because I edit some fashion videos every now and then, and I've done a few like Tom Ford pieces and whatnot, and it's like,
I know where you're going.
you know what I mean. It's materialism, to a fault, and so there's that approach you can take to having a fashion industry. And then you have these brands that are more socially aware. I'd say like the OG brand is like Tom's.
Yeah.
Like if you're someone in 2022 and you aspire to make a fashion brand, do you have personal advice? Is there financial benefits of just making something look nice and just aesthetically pleasing, or do you recommend, throwing in, some sort of nonprofit kind of helpful aspect into your brand, and what are the challenges of doing that, versus just having clothing for aesthetics? What are the challenges of making it have a purpose along with it?
Yeah, so I actually think the way that you worded that was really great. So one of the things, I think the way you worded it was, should you have clothes and just throw in like a social purpose or like a charity or for whatnot? And one big thing that I want to say there is that if you're going to support a charity or an organization or a cause of some sort, do it genuinely. Don't just say, oh, I want to make clothes and it'll look good for me if I say I also donate X% to a place. You want to make sure that that's actually ingrained in your business model, that it's actually, it makes sense, the community or charity that you're going to be working with, that it actually has something to do with your products, that it's not just, oh, I've added this on just because it will make you look good. You don't kind of want that inauthentic PR, I guess, is the way that I would call it. You want to make sure that when you're creating a company, you have really outlined what the reason for building this company is. It's not that you just you're a fashion designer because you like fashion. What is it? What's your actual goal? What's the outcome? Who are you trying to help in this kind of area? And are you actually going to be helping someone, or are you just adding to kind of overconsumption and the potential shallowness of fashion that we've caused or talked about? So Is there actually something that you're doing that is unique, that isn't already in the market? Is there value to what you're doing? And is there actually value in who you could be helping? So for us, Braille fashion doesn't exist. And this entire community, those who are visually impaired, and then furthermore, disability community, as we kind of grow, is completely underserved in fashion. So if someone here listening wants to be a part of fashion and they specifically want to work with a community that is completely overlooked, or an area within fashion that could kind of benefit from social change, absolutely. There is so much room for that type of fashion. If you're just going to make things just because, there's really no need for that. And I would say really evaluate what it is that's drawing you to even do that in the first place. Because once you go through that process and really figure out what you're passionate about, you may realize that you never wanted to create a fashion business in the first place. I don't know if that really makes sense, but I just feel like you really need to understand the reason you're doing something and the value that it could bring to others. Yeah,
no, that's very well said. And I had a hunch you would say that. And
great. So predictable.
No, not at all. I wanted to make a point that, while I said it earlier, I believe in the statement, look good, feel good. Mm-hmm. I like fashion. I buy things for the aesthetics of it. I'm not going to say I don't do it.
Exactly.
But I was thinking, like, there can be a shallowness to it. And as someone who's in the industry, and as someone who has a brand around, Braille and inclusivity to disabilities, it has to feel good, the fact that you're able to do both, and you have a passion for fashion, and you're able to make clothing that looks good and it has a good purpose behind it. Like, what more could you want? You want a job that you're passionate about, but you also want a job that's helpful, versus just commercial, Yeah. That was the only point I was making. It definitely wasn't a knock or anything like that.
That's okay.
The next question I'm going to ask you is, I said the one last question, but I was lying. The See-Through podcast, if I want to get, what would you recommend I get from Aille Design? I know your clothes are mainly And tell me if I'm wrong. They're more targeted to women.
So I will tell you that you're wrong, though I completely understand how you came to that conclusion. So as I was kind of mentioning earlier, the company launched in 2020 during the pandemic. And so really not trying to see too many people during that process. And my closest group and bubble just so happened to be female presenting. So a lot of our clothes happen to be on women. My husband is wearing some of our pieces, so he's like the male presence in some of them. But yeah, right now, all of our t-shirts and masks are actually unisex, so you could wear them as well. But fair to say, like, we are going to be launching a blue dress. That one is more traditionally female or feminine. But another thing that we want to do is, like you said before, look good, feel good. If you want to wear a dress, all the power to you. I'm not going to tell you how to actually dress, what you can and cannot wear, but I want to be able to offer those styles that you can kind of present the way that you want to present to the world. But so
for sure.
For See-Through Podcast, I'd say you need a t-shirt for sure that says See-Through Podcast, maybe one that is a little bit more like cheeky. I feel like you've got like some hidden gem one-liners hidden there that we could kind of just put in Braille. But yeah, that's what I'd say.
I'll think about it. I'm definitely going to order one. I just got to think about what I want it to have. And that, if you're listening and you want to order a shirt yourself, what's the, let's pitch that. What's the URL? Where can they buy your product?
So website is ailledesign.com, and it's spelled AILLE design.com. And then for Instagram as well, if you want to give us a follow, we're at Aille Design and spelled the same way. Yeah.
And if you use the code See-Through Pod, you get your order free.
Oh, okay.
I'm just joking.
Maybe we can accommodate some free shipping. Lance and I will talk about that, but stay tuned.
I'm just joking. That would be funny if I just put you on the spot like that. But cool. Is there anything else you want to pitch that, I don't know.
I feel pretty good. I think we talked about a pretty wide range of things.
Yeah, I agree. We're at the hour mark, and I think we if you really think about it, we covered quite a bit.
Yeah, we really, really did. I'm excited to listen to this afterwards. I feel like I don't even remember some of the things I've said.
Oh, that happens to me every epised. I go back.
You're like, did I ask you this question already?
Yeah, when I go edit them, I'm like, oh, I forgot about that. Or I don't remember asking that. Or I say something good. I'm like, oh, Lance, nice.
I love it.
But yeah, I really appreciate your time, and I love what you're doing with Aille Design, and I look forward to seeing the where'd you go, and I look forward to just staying in touch. It's nice.
Thank you. Likewise, yeah, absolutely. I have a lot of family in New York, so next time we're visiting, maybe we can all get together.
Sounds good to me. Thanks, Alexa, and I'll see you soon.
Sounds good. Bye.